Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now, the Prime Minister has accused lawyers of hounding war veterans over allegations of abuse in conflict. He says he wants to stamp out what he calls a spurious industry that seeks out victims with no-win, no-fee offers against British troops returning from war. But lawyers insist that no one should be above the law, even on the battlefield. The Iraq Historic Allegations team is currently investigating 280 UK veterans over alleged abuse. Paul McNamara reports.
It's almost 13 years since British boots first laid foot on Iraqi soil. But some fights are far from over. Hundreds of soldiers are still being pursued through the courts over abuse allegations. One such battle took 4 years and more than £30 million. And after all that, this is what they found.
The vast majority of the allegations made against the British military were wholly and entirely without merit or justification.
One of the British law firms at the centre of the Al-Swedi inquiry has been referred to the Solicitors' Disciplinary Tribunal. It's accused of a raft of improper practices. And today, David Cameron vowed that episodes like this should never happen again.
An industry seems to be being built up around making spurious claims against the brave men and women of our armed forces, and that is not acceptable. That is no way to treat people that we ask to do difficult and dangerous work on our behalf. So I'm determined to shut this industry down.
Mark Evans served in Iraq a decade ago. Yet last month, he received a letter telling him he was under investigation.
It's I have very mixed feelings, because on the one hand I do feel that if crimes have been committed and things have been done wrong, then they should be investigated, and there is a due legal procedure for us to go through. However, the way that it's gone about, and potentially the protection that is offered to particularly our veterans, I think is something that we do need to have a real think about.
So what protections have been introduced, and what effect will they have? Today's announcement is aimed at the human rights lawyers who work here, Lee Day, and many others like them. David Cameron has vowed to clamp down on no-win, no-fee agreements. He's vowed to clamp down on the costs that could be awarded under those agreements, and he's vowed stronger penalties for firms found to be abusing the system. But is it really fair to say that these firms are just in it to make money for themselves? After all, they have represented many Iraqis alleging abuse, and they have won large settlements that the MOD has agreed to pay out. So far, Britain has paid out nearly £20 million in out-of-court settlements to Iraqi civilians or their families. That relates to 323 cases, but there are more than 1,500 cases outstanding. One claim was for the death of hotel receptionist Baha Musa. In 2003, he died in custody after suffering 93 separate injuries. A public inquiry found he suffered gratuitous violence at the hands of British troops. Hilary Meredith represents British troops in abuse cases. She says while there are some bona fide cases, many more claims are spurious.
That we've allowed a flood of taxpayers' money to go overseas to foreigners to claim, many of whom have been found out to be insurgents, not civilians.
Lee Day deny any wrongdoing. Today they said, no one is above the law, not us, not the British Army, and not the government. They added, we cannot imagine that the Prime Minister is proposing that should change.
But I'm joined in the studio now by Tom Tugendhat, Conservative MP for Tunbridge and veteran of the war in Iraq. Joining us from Dorset is Lieutenant Colonel Nicholas Mercer, now an Anglican priest. Mercer was the British Army's chief legal advisor in Iraq in 2003. Thanks for coming in the programme, both of you. Let me turn to you, first of all, Lieutenant Colonel Mercer. The fact that there are over 1,000 cases on the books does seem a little bit like an industry, doesn't it, if perhaps not a spurious one?
Well, I think, yes, I hear what you say about the number of cases, but one of the allegations is that there was systemic abuse of Iraqi prisoners after they were captured. And although the figure seems high, you've already referred to the fact that 326 cases have been settled, at a cost of £20 million. So clearly this isn't just one or two bad apples as they've been characterised. This is on a fairly large and substantial scale.
So you think the figure's right?
Well, it's very hard to judge, of course. I mean, each claim is different. I mean, the way it's been presented is that Al Swedi shows that spurious claims have been brought. Yes, Al Swedi was spurious, and no one denies that. But all the other claims that have been settled were with merit. And you've just referred to the case of Baha Musa, which is extremely serious. And when the findings were announced, it demonstrated serious corporate failings by the Ministry of Defence. It's extremely important that these cases are brought to court and brought to inquiries if necessary.
OK, well, let me turn to Tom Tugendhat. I mean, you heard what he had to say there. I mean, this is a huge number of cases, some of them very serious indeed, and the MOD has settled on hundreds of cases itself. The MOD doesn't give money away lightly. So clearly there is a case to be answered here, isn't
Well, the Padre is absolutely right that it is unclear as to how many of the future cases, or the cases still pending, have merit. And he's also right that 300 and some cases have been settled. But some of those cases have been settled for the simple reason that the evidence proving it is very difficult, and the army has, and the defence has decided that the best way to settle this to the benefit of the armed forces and to the benefit of the civilians concerned is to settle rather than force action. Now, what we're really talking about here is not those cases. What the Prime Minister is specifically talking about is the incidents such as the one that recently happened, which involved the law firm that you mentioned, in which militants, Iraqi militias, were actually using the British courtroom in order to counterattack when they had been defeated on the battlefield. And that's
But to call that a spurious industry, I mean, that's going a bit far, isn't it?
Well, I think the Prime Minister is really pointing to the fact that there are spurious cases arising out of people claiming to have been injured on the battlefield or injured in custody, when in fact they're enemy combatants who have been defeated on the battlefield and are now seeking to have a second bite at the cherry, as it were, to have a second attack on our servicemen through our courts. And I think that's wrong, and I think the Prime Minister is absolutely right to point it out.
Reverend, you heard that just now. Do you agree with Tom Tugendhat?
Well, no, I mean, I hear what he says about Al Swedi, and yes, that was the finding of the inquiry, and no one can deny that. But to try and sweep 326 cases under the carpet and say it was a sort of goodwill gesture from the MOD is just nonsense. The MOD fights every case tooth and nail. It always has done, and anyone who's sued them knows that for a fact. These claims were with merit and the MOD settled. That in itself speaks volumes about the nature and extent of these allegations.
Tom Tugendhat, I mean, even in war, even on the battlefield, there have to be laws that apply. Isn't the danger with this that if we vilify that legal process, we're going to take that legal protection away?
Well, I think actually there's a really big danger here that we're applying the wrong law. It's not that there should be no law on the battlefield. There should, and there is, and that's the Geneva Convention. It's the correct form of law. Queen's regulations and the Geneva Convention apply to all soldiers anywhere in the world, in battle, in peace. What we're doing here is we're extending European Convention rights. That's a very different thing. And this is an extraterritorial jurisdiction, which the Padre will understand very well, has only really been extended since the Bankovic case a number of years ago, and finally really only extended in the Al Sadoun case in 2015, which said quite specifically that any individual coming into contact with the state force, that means British soldiers, is now covered by European Convention rights, which means that we now have the absurd situation where soldiers in combat are being asked to defend the human rights of those who are attacking them. OK, Reverend Mercer, would you like to jump in there?
No, I'm afraid it's just been complete misrepresentation by the Conservative Party. This is just absolute nonsense. The Human Rights Act, to an extent, reflects the Geneva Conventions, that when you've reduced a man to capture, you treat him with humanity and decency. It doesn't make any difference whether you're applying the Geneva Conventions or the European Convention on Human Rights. What's happening here, it seems, is that the government is hijacking this to have a go at lawyers who are bringing cases against them, and also to further their purposes in trying to abolish the Human Rights Act. Both of them are myths.
Isn't that what this is about? It's become political. It's about Europe, and it's about the European Court.
Sorry, this has nothing to do with Europe. The European Convention has nothing to do with the European Union, so let's be very clear about that.
But it is become a political football.
It's not a political football, it's a security football. And it's absolutely essential that the National Security Council considers, as the Prime Minister has suggested, ways in ensuring that British forces are able to operate legally under the correct laws of armed conflict in battle, so that should they commit abuses, they are, quite rightly, tried, prosecuted, found guilty and punished. But when they are merely acting as soldiers should in time of war, they are given the freedom to operate, the freedom to take decisions that young men in command in battle situations need to have without having an eye over their shoulder to a cool courtroom where they're going to be tried for crimes that simply haven't been committed.
OK, quick response from you, finally, Reverend Mercer.
Sorry, could you repeat that, please?
Well, let me ask the question then. I mean, isn't the point that, you know, if you apply too much of this law, it's just going to make the job of British soldiers in the battlefield more difficult? And ultimately, that's also what this is about.
No, I'm sorry. I've given legal advice on the battle in a battlefield situation. It's not complicated. The Geneva Conventions apply to situations of combat. Well, all right. And in situations where a man is reduced to captivity, it's both the Geneva Conventions and the European Convention on Human Rights. And thank goodness we've got the Convention on Human Rights, because there was a systematic attempt to unstitch the Geneva Conventions. At least people held in British custody have an extra safeguard, and do not take that away, because the abuses could be tantamount.
All right, got to leave it there. Run out of time. Nicholas Mercer, Tom Tugendhat, thank you very much indeed.
I've been getting away with it